Well, hello there, and welcome to Jolie's, where you can get yourself some spicy sausage, some roasted nuts, and the freshest React content here on YouTube. Now, today I'm watching What Video Games Get Wrong and Right About Capitalism by Infomercial. So this is the first time that I'm watching this creator. This could be a swing and a miss for all I know, but I do enjoy myself some critical theory about capitalism. So we're going to get into it here in just a second. But before we do that, I want to see how fast this channel, this community can get up to 100 subscribers. So please use whichever appendage you deem appropriate and smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and turn on those notifications with that YouTube notification hot and ready bell. So with all that out of the way, let's get into it. 3, 2, 1, boop. We all live in the same country. It's called capitalism. Bong Joon-ho. Great filmmaker, great quotes right there.
There's an old joke. Maybe you've heard it. Two fish swimming around in the ocean. One of them says, "Man, the water's cold today."
All right, somebody's read David Foster Wallace. Hey, if you've read Infinite Jest or experienced Infinite Jest, I'll get into it in a later video. Please tell me your favorite character in the comments and why it's Don Gately.
The other fish turns to him and says, "What the hell is water?" It's hard to see something when we're swimming in it.
Yeah.
When it's all around us 24/7, we tend to take those things for granted. Any discussion of capitalism, I think, needs to start here by acknowledging that on some level, we don't see capitalism.
That is very true. It's like a propaganda is another great example of this here in America. We are so well propagandized to that we do not know. Like, if you were to ask my dad right now, who's sitting in front, well, he's doing it less, but he was sitting in front of Fox News probably for the last 20 years, watching Fox and Friends and all of those shows every day. If he had propaganda coming into him, he would say, "No, I live in America. We don't do propaganda," or something to that effect. And you know, trust me, it's not just Fox News. It's everything, anything and everything. It's all propaganda for the same, masters at the top, delivering the same message and keeping us divided as people so that they stand on top of us, and I could go on, but yeah. And the propaganda is going back to capitalism, because that's essentially what we're completely built upon, a system that was designed before the internet, like before the information superhighway. I think it's there's many things I think have like great ideas that have long reached their expiration date. I would say the capitalism as we experienced it for the past, as it was devised, was not devised for the world as it is. It was devised for a world that was still ever growing. But we can get into that, and I'm sure he's going to get into it here too. So let's keep watching.
And on some level, capitalism doesn't want to be seen. Describing capitalism in any kind of serious way can almost feel like describing a dream you had to someone. The words are there, but they disappear before you can get them out. And even the memory of what you were trying to say evaporates.
I'm stealing that. That's amazing. Great work there. Infotainment. Shoot, I forgot his name already. Infomercial. I think that was it. Like the idea, yeah, like the analogy of the dream. Like, it is so ever present, so all over the place that you can't. You have no starting point. The wool is everywhere. There's no thread to pull, if you will. That will give you the entire thing. By the time that you've built up capitalism as what it is, as best you can, to illustrate to somebody else, it doesn't make sense anymore. It is so ubiquitous.
But it's inevitable that art, media, TV shows, books, movies, will try and grapple with the water that they're swimming in. So, if a video game wants to say something about capitalism, how does it go about doing that? To explore that question, I want to take a look at two games that approach this issue from different angles, and they both succeed and fail in their own ways.
I should know this from the thumbnail. I know that, I shouldn't say obviously, but I think one of the games he's going to be talking about is, oh, great. I paused it just so I could forget the name of something. I think if I were guessing, I would say Cyberpunk 2077 and what was the name of that game? I am such a dummy. The CCRPG. He'll get to it. This was a worthless pause. I'm worthless. Ugh.
But before we get to that, we just have to answer one super duper easy question
Ad?
first.
Oh. Well, ad for capitalism.
The word capitalism is a bit of a Rorschach test. If you ask a random sample of people to define it, their answers would probably reveal a lot about who they are, what they value, and what sort of core beliefs motivate them. Spend any time on the internet, and you'll come across 1,000 different interpretations of this word, coming at it from 1,000 different angles.
Okay, well, he kind of like begs the question, what do I consider capitalism? That's a... Wow. Okay. I would say that I would understand capitalism to more or less be a system in which individuals and individuals by themselves or in a group can come together to create a business or offer a service that then makes them revenue. But that doesn't seem good enough. I mean, I would, because to me, it's like capitalism is not bad of it in of itself. It's just how ubiquitous it is the thing that's the problem. And I'm not trying to define it based on the problem. I'm trying to define it based on what is true, but also is a good enough definition or a generous enough definition or a neutral enough definition to where it's like it's not inherently a bad thing. But I mean, ultimately, the means of production are controlled by. I mean, that's a big thing. The means of production, right? So I would say it's like the means to produce the goods, the services, are owned and operated, and thus, rewarded to those who either created the innovation or hold the keys to the innovation. Like, so say I came up with a new service and I would then generate essentially, metaphorically, I would generate the keys to that operation, and I would continue to be the person who all the money goes up to and out from. I'm like I'm the heart of the operation at that point, maybe the heart and the brain. And so the money flows to me, and thus from me, the money is distributed to grow the business, to employ people, and I get to be the one to decide how that happens. If I want to be completely altruistic, folks, you're not coming here for my pronunciation. You're coming here for my takes. But if I was to be completely selfless, I could decide to make zero profit and either give it all to charity or give it all back to my employees, like in forms of bonuses. I could decide to try to cut costs as much as possible, so that way, meaning like the fewest amount of people working for the least amount of money possible, which is ultimately what anybody who came into an operation and told you how to make your business better would tell you to do. And I think that's where the problem lies. But if I wanted to make the best business possible so that I could either make as much money coming in and keep it as much of the money coming in for myself or for the business itself, or to show people how profitable my business is so that way they want to buy it for a large amount of money. I think the key is there in the key to capitalism, and I could be wrong. Like, capitalism is when I get to make I as the business owner and operator and financier, like some combination of all of that, get to make all the decisions about my business, whether those decisions are good and a good being that they can make my business continue to move forward, or bad, and thus they make my business unable to move forward, all that responsibility falls upon me, whether it be the praise of being a visionary who succeeded, or the condemnation of being somebody who ran a business into the ground. And when I say good and bad, like I said, I meant like for the business to continue to go and grow. So it might seem like a good idea for me to be altruistic, like I said, and go out on a limb and give my employees all this money, all the money that comes in, because I believe that happy employees, well fed, well taken care of employees will make the most money. But if I don't put a stop to that, then no money is going into my own, could potentially not be going into my own pocket. So I don't feel the benefits of guiding the business, and thus I lack on that. Or we're not saving money in case a rainy day comes, and all of a sudden, yeah, the employees have been made, I don't want to say overly paid, but they've been well compensated. But at the lack of there being anything stored in the coffers, a pandemic like COVID-19 comes around, we don't have any money in the coffers to sustain the business through a downswing, and thus we have to close. So what seems like a good decision could become a bad decision, and the vice versa. What seems like a bad decision, cutting costs, and having the money accumulate into like coffers for the business at the expense of like paying employees less, having fewer employees, customer service maybe suffers, but we sustain, and we get hit by a pandemic, and we have the money to sustain the pandemic and the downswing in the economy. And I'm not saying, and let's face it, what happened during the pandemic is a lot of people who, oh my gosh, I've said COVID-19 and I need to edit those out, don't I? Like I could be like instantly sent to the shadow realm. Okay, expect some editing. I have to edit this video now. Anyways, so if something like if an economic downswing comes along, there's a lot of people out there who decided to cut costs by paying their employees less and getting fewer employees, and thus had their business work as efficiently as possible. But they didn't put that money into savings for rainy day. They just kept all that money for themselves and were spending it the entire time. And then once rainy day comes around, they're left without the funds to see it through. And many such cases, I would say. That was a long-winded, I don't have enough time. I gotta go see my girlfriend, guys. I don't have enough time to get to revise that, but essentially to say, I guess capitalism is where the main decision maker gets to be the business owner, and they ultimately have as a few regulations, and the government is there to protect them more than their employees or the other citizens of the country. Let's see what he says.
I won't pretend to be an expert here, but I want to take a stab at giving us a working definition of this term for the purposes of this video. And for that, I'm going to introduce my first source for this video, a short book by Yale scholar Emanuel
What is this guy, a nerd?
Wallerstein, called World Systems Analysis. World Systems Analysis is both the title of the book and the title of a particular method of understanding the world, pioneered by Wallerstein and some other scholars of history, economics, and sociology. To put it briefly, World Systems Analysis places an emphasis on a comprehensive understanding of globalized trade, manufacturing, and commerce rather than nation states. Basically, countries are fake, sort of. They're lines on a map. Ideas in people's heads.
Which is straight, like, that's one of those concepts that I think is inevitable in some ways, or at the very least that this is probably going to become the struggle of the next like few hundred years. Well, a few hundred years, it could be way shorter than that. By the end of the century, there'll probably be a conflict orienting itself around this, but the idea being that this is something that people on the far left and far right economically and socially agree upon in different ways. I think the far left people think that borders shouldn't exist, that people should be able just to flow freely between nations, and that there shouldn't be any sort of harsh restrictions, or there should be less restrictions. And I'm really talking about very, a very niche group within the left wing. I think that's like a very radical stance, but there's also this perspective that ultimately what wins is commerce and economy. And why do we have these lines on a map? They are antiquated and outdated, which is something that I tend to say about other things, like our our I would hope this isn't too controversial, but our Constitution is a little bit out of date, I think, for the world that we live in today. So they're approaching it the same idea from a different perspective, I think.
If you really want to understand how the world works, it's better to focus on how resources, including money, move between places rather than restricting yourself to studying this country or that country. To scholars like Wallerstein, capitalism is the defining trait of our modern world system. It is a global economic system. It's the logic that dictates the flows of money, material, property, and people. There are more and less profitable firms. There are corporations which are heavily monopolized and held up by the power of governments, and those which receive very little state support. Some people are made fabulously, unimaginably wealthy by corporate profits, and some never see a dime. In fact, instead of profits flowing down from the top, it usually works in reverse. Money, wealth, power, and prestige are siphoned up from more peripheral types of production and captured at the top.
Yes, that's 100% true, and that's why taxation is very. I think of it as a blood system. And if you think this analogy doesn't work, let me know, and we can maybe discuss further how to get to something that's a better analogy. But I often think of it as a blood system. It's like your potential, like you. This is the heart. Capitalism, the top is the heart. All the money flows to it, and in a healthy system, it flows to it, and it goes back out, refreshed, renewed, to give nutrients to all the other parts of the body. And I fear that what's happening with the way that we're playing capitalism now, the trickle up, it's trickle up. I think there's a better term for it, but basically, the capitalism says that everything should come to a point. Is missing the far view of eventually, if everything comes to that point and everything below you on that pyramid of hierarchy is suffering because you think that you should have all of the resources. There's a resource, this is a resource that you can't really control, at least not easily, and that's people's physical bodies and their emotions. And we've seen recently what happens when people get very resourceful and decide that somebody needs to that somebody has has too much power and they're using it inappropriately. I mean, this all ebbs and flows. This is history. This is humanity. It's the cycles. But I do believe that capitalism is a good system when it has those regulations, and those regulations being often taxes, fines, restrictions, and the taxes allow for the capital owners to redistribute. That's a word that will probably get people to tune out instantly if I say the word redistribute. But not anyone, very few individual capital owners have the time to figure out how to best seed their money for the next generation, nor do some of them don't even care about that. They're in it for themselves, when the society as a whole needs people looking out for the education and well-being of the entire system. So more on that as we go, I'm sure.
This is obviously an extreme simplification, but you get the gist of it. Capitalism is the water. It touches everything, informs everything, directs everything in some way. For most people, we will never be in the rooms where these world-altering decisions are being made. And a lot of these decisions never affect us in a direct way. But when something goes wrong at this top level of corporate power, it reverberates down through every other level. The 2008 financial crisis, the supply chain shocks from the COVID-19 pandemic, things like that. Capitalism is a connective tissue between far-flung industries, corners of the world, people, and systems of government. This barely scratches the surface of Wallerstein and world system analysis in general, but that is a deep enough dive for now. What is capitalism? It's the current reigning economic system that influences how resources are distributed, how profits are made, and how people live their lives. And, key to the first game I'm talking about today, it's something none of us signed up for.
Yeah, this is something that... Well, we didn't sign up for life either, folks, did we? We were just bestowed it when our parents got horny and did horny things with each other. Probably alcohol was involved, let's face it. But yes, this is probably the where the red pill, black pill, whatever you want, really comes in. Is we're born into a world that was decided for us, and we hope that we're standing on the shoulders of benevolent giants. But you know, their reason for what they did in setting up the world the way it is, it wasn't necessarily to benefit you. So just something to be aware of, and how you operate. I personally am of the belief that the founding fathers founded, well, brilliant men, brilliant, but they ultimately founded a country. They were all wealthy landowner types for the most part, and they, in their debates, founded a country for people like them first and foremost. And thus, this is where we live versus some other countries or some other nations or some other places that put the foundation, the working class type folks, the everyman first and foremost. And I'm sure we'll be getting into more of that as this channel goes on.
Cyberpunk 2077
I called it.
rips. It is one of my favorite games of the past 5 years. A troubled dev cycle combined with an unsatisfying release filled with bugs and performance issues eventually, through the hard work of the developers, became a polished roller coaster of an experience. In its current state, all the pieces come together almost perfectly. The gunplay, the exploration, the storytelling, even little things like the user interface and perk system are so satisfying to
Yeah, and that's what I'm advocating for. The new United States of America. That's the thing. It's like, even no matter how self-centered I might project the founding fathers to be, just be assured that there's somebody even more self-centered out there who wouldn't mind making it even more just for themselves and for their benefit.
It's a hell of a game, but we're not here to talk about all of that. On the surface, Cyberpunk 2077 and its expansion Phantom Liberty look like they have something to say. Cyberpunk isn't just the name of the game, after all. It's a whole genre of science fiction storytelling stretching back to the 1980s and paranoid classics like William S. Gibson's Neuromancer. Cyberpunk as a genre is filled with satire and social critique, taking the world we all live in today and cranking up certain aspects to 11 in order to point out their flaws, contradictions, cruelty, and injustice. Most cyberpunk authors would not be card-carrying communists or radical anti-capitalist crusaders, but in most cyberpunk texts, you'll find a message somewhere along the lines of maybe unrestrained corporate power and tech oligarchy is bad.
Yeah, maybe. And that's, I think, hopefully the change that we see here in the next few years, which is you don't have to be a tanky. You don't have to be some sort of like radical libertarian, to be opposed to the systems that are running current America, running the current world, to think that there's a better world out there. And I'm not talking about a utopia. I'm just talking about a world where the problems we're dealing with are the next level problems. We're on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The needs that we're dealing with, especially in these past few years, we've downgraded to much more basic needs. That we'll get into our own problems and our own conflicts as we cover those and get into a new society. But hopefully we're talking about problems about how to, reach out through the stars, how to be, seed humanity for the next, 50 millennia, something to that effect, versus how do I put food on my table? How do I make sure I have enough for myself and my family?
Following in its predecessor's footsteps, Cyberpunk 2077 paints a picture of a near-future Earth with select dials turned up to 11. Think corporations have too much power in our world? In Night City, it's hard to even tell where the corpos end and the government begins. Think our healthcare system in America is brutal, expensive, and inefficient? In Night City, they've replaced hospitals with unlicensed doctors operating in alleyways for cash under the table. Do you think police militarization is a problem? What if the cops had armored core mechs and swords for hands? You get the picture. It's intentionally silly and over the top, painting in bold colors to get your attention. But the story of Cyberpunk 2077 is much more personal and intimate than you might think. It is not overly concerned with politics, economics, large movements, or social upheaval. It is an individual story of one person trying to get their life back. You can choose from 3 different backgrounds when you create your character, but all of them end up in the same place.
Yeah.
In the back of a Delamain cab with your friend Jackie bleeding out next to you, a piece of untested tech in your head, and no idea how to get it out. From there, the story is mainly focused on the characters you meet and the jobs you do for them in order to follow leads on how to get the Arasaka chip and Johnny Silverhand out of your head and get back to the way things were. However, the game does still have something to say about capitalism, even if the commentary is largely regulated to the background. The characters in the story are aware of capitalism as a concept, which is a step further than most games would take. The world itself is obviously shaped by profit-seeking corporations, and the world those corporations have made is mostly regarded as a negative. But there's an absence of any sort of organized resistance to it. The characters seem to have all embraced a sort of fatalism. There is no political solution to the crises and contradictions in the world of Cyberpunk 2077, only small and ultimately useless acts of individual resistance. Johnny, when he was alive in the 2020s, thought one man could take on all these forces and win. He believed naively in himself.
Yeah, that's a good commentary, because it is like, while the world needs like leaders in order to make change, you know, and people to rally around, ultimately those people are nothing without the others around them. And if they start thinking that they are, you know, I don't want to say more worthy, but I don't know. We'll get into it, but that's an interesting point. Johnny Silverhand's failure, in a lot of ways, is his narcissism, maybe, or his like self delusions of grandeur.
In his own power. The idea that a single person could bring a system like capitalism to its knees is an object of routine mockery in the game. It regularly skewers stick-it-to-the-man, punk, anarchist revolutionaries like Johnny as naive and self-centered at heart. Johnny is a loser. That much is clear in the game. He's egotistical, out of touch, obsessed with his own legend, to the point where he can't even see how much he failed to actually change. He, like the other characters in the game, retreats into a sort of cynical individualism. Fuck the world. Fuck everyone else. It's not worth it to try and fix things. Conspicuously missing from Cyberpunk 2077's musings on capitalism is any real mention of organized labor. Sure, corpos rule everything with an iron fist, but a corporation is made up of workers, people who clock in every day to get the job done. Are the Arasaka guards unionized? Do the dock workers in Night City ever go on strike? The only mention I could find of organized labor in the game was a side gig called The Union Strikes Back. The gig has you assassinate the leader of a private security company who specializes in disciplining workers asking for concessions from their bosses. In the message you get about the gig, the quest giver says, "The unions are gone." But it doesn't say anything else about where they went. Were they outlawed? Did the police or the military crack down on them so hard that no one has tried reforming them? The flow of goods into and out of a place is one of the central features that...
So, I don't know, just having a stray thought here, but I've been in a industry that isn't unionized for my entire adult life. And I think one of the things that holds this industry, I'm talking about service industry. I was, wait staff bartending, and right now delivery driving. And I think one of the things that holds this specific group back is just the fact that they more so almost than any other gig, you see yourself as being in between spaces for years. So, and you gradually become a lifer, and when you get to becoming a lifer, then you start thinking about this could be better. But then you're surrounded by, the percentage of lifers is way lower than the general population of your occupation. So those folks that you're now dealing with and now trying to convince to unionize see themselves just like, what's the point? I'm just between gigs. This is just my starting gig before I get my real job. And some of them will eventually become lifers as well. And by that time, they're going to start thinking different. But it's really tough to get them all to agree. And it's all, let's face it, it's, if you know anything about service staff and that sort of thing, there's not a lot of long-term thinking in that field. I think that there's a big change that could come around and be freaking amazing for service staff people. But I think that there's a lot of preconceived notions that you'd have to get around. And, especially if you want to talk about changing the way our service economy works with tipping, it would probably have to start at the servers uniting around the service workers uniting around a system that they can all agree upon, like a locked-in system. What I keep saying, and you'll probably hear me hit this point over and over again, but I think a commission-based system, if we're going to have it to where the amount of money I make is based upon how much sales I do, theoretically, it should be locked in. I would rather get a guaranteed 20% than to get stiffed, some percentage of the time and get a windfall other percentage. I mean, I would rather people not even have a tip line if it just meant every single time I'm as a server, as a table server or a counter server, there's a certain percentage baked in that I'm getting from every sale. But the owners definitely don't want to have that conversation, because then it really affects how they price things, and it becomes much more on them to give us the correct amount. Anyways, there's a lot more to be said towards that, but I do think that if we're going to live in a service-based economy, the servers should probably be unionized. And it's not just about one. When it comes to that, it's like dock workers. It's not about one company. You can't just be a union within one single company. You have to unionize a city, basically, of the same industry. That way everybody's playing by the same rules. That way no one company can come in and try to undercut. They can try to make a non-union shop if they want to and deal with the strikes or, the getting blacklisted, whatever it is. But yeah, you'd have to really build it up, and it requires a lot of effort by a few core people to get all those other people to, work together and to toe the same line. But if they were to get to that point where they're all pulling the same line, they could freaking pull a ship out of the ocean.
Defines capitalism. Who controls the flow? Who profits from it? Who organizes it? Answers to these questions aren't part of what the game is trying to achieve. Jackie himself asks you an interesting question a short while before you embark on the doomed Arasaka heist at the beginning of the game. He wants to know what you would prefer, to live a long life or to go out in a blaze of glory. From his point of view, the best possible end to your life is to get dropped in the middle of a mission. It's sort of like Valhalla for the mercs of Night City. Mm-hmm. Your name lives on, even if you don't. You get a drink named after you at the bar. The idea of any other sort of life, marriage, family, kids, a white picket fence in the suburbs, doesn't seem to have occurred to him. Even something as personal as his desires and dreams are being manipulated by forces so vast and above his head that he couldn't really grapple with them if he tried. You and everyone else in the city didn't choose to be born there. You never signed up to live in a world like this. Similarly, you as the player character don't have a choice in whether or not Johnny Silverhand lives in your head. He didn't have a say either. This theme of coercion is probably the most interesting thing that Cyberpunk has to say. The game is chock full of choices the player gets to make, but are these really meaningful choices in the world the characters inhabit? What do we get to decide about our lives? And more importantly, what don't we get to decide?
I mean, he brings up a great point. Think about how hard it is to imagine a different world, a different possibility for yourself. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say here, but the effort that you have to go through in order just to imagine a different way things can be is a great, great effort. So, requiring a lot of imagination, a lot of brain power. Like, you really will have to, if you want to dedicate yourself to changes like this, you're going to have to dedicate your life to it. It basically becomes your side gig, if not your main gig, if you're lucky. And most likely you're not going to get paid for it until everybody gets paid out. But, working for everybody else, working for, like, knowing that you're waking up in a society, in a community that is better taken care of, might be worth it. I mean, would you rather, live in a mansion in the slums, or would you rather everybody have a decent enough place around you? And some people, they're probably going to say mansion in the slums because they would just rather be better off than everybody else around them.
Do we have the right to try and change things? And if we do, will those efforts even work, or will they only get us more stuck in place? The answer Cyberpunk gives to these questions is surprisingly pessimistic. There are no happy endings for you. Not really. Even the best of the numerous possible conclusions to the game involve you suffering significant loss, hardship, and heartbreak.
Oh,
You
that's
are
life,
one
baby.
person up against the power of godlike tech corporations, a militarized police state, and a criminal underworld so vast it's like a maze trying to navigate it. Your body is not your own, and your options are limited. Cyberpunk gestures at capitalism, at its contradictions and abuses, but never takes that extra step in exploring these things at a greater length. But it gets the vibes right. It drills down on a specific kind of modern unease and self-awareness.
I think for a game, I definitely prefer games that are less story-driven and more systems-driven. At least I claim that to be true. We'll see if that actually pans out. But I think for a game that's very much a single-player story where you're taking on the protagonist role, you're taking on the role of the hero of the story, you can only nail vibes. I would say that that's one reason that I would highly recommend looking into more systemic games if you want to actually wrap your brain around how the world works versus, it's like Star Wars, I guess, is a great example of a movie that sort of was going for political and philosophical ideals, and it nails the vibes of them, but you can't really totally apply the lessons of Obi-Wan and Yoda that they give to Luke. They're great for the moment. They kind of crack your head open just a little bit, but you're really going to have to sit down and read the text that those ideas come from in order to more thoroughly seed those ideas and make them actually applicable to your life, because they ultimately are just applicable to the character of Luke Skywalker, and here the character of V, which is the purpose of narrative. Because remember, we're still talking about entertainment. We're not talking about education. This is an entertainment narrative, first and foremost. And what messages it gets across from you are gravy, if you will. They're just a topping. And if you are engaged with those, then you can go and do further reading, do further studies, watch more videos featuring me reacting to them, like and subscribe. But ultimately, you're not going to get a full-fledged message from a protagonist story, from a hero's story. And you're going to have to go to something more systemic if you truly want to become the hero of your own life.
I can relate to the feeling of being backed into a corner with no good options in front of me. I know what it feels like to want a better world for my family and friends, but feel unable to do anything on my own to bring about that world. I know how shitty it feels to be forced to do something I don't want to do, and know that if I resisted, things would only turn out worse for me. It's impressionistic. It's a bird's eye view of a world where the big dial that says capitalism is turned up a few more notches. And I give it credit for being so downright nasty and mean in its depiction of what that world would look like. Cyberpunk does not go any farther in suggesting some kind of remedy to this world, and it doesn't have to. A story about a guy who is just fucked no matter what he does can be a great story. Some of my favorite stories are like that. It's bracing. It's like a cold shower, getting thrown headlong into a grim situation with no good way out. And if we're being honest, life can feel like that. But the world we live in is not inevitable or unchangeable. The people at the top of any given hierarchy would very much like you to think that, but it's not true. Human history is a flow. It's like a river. Nothing stays the same.
I'm a believer in the hierarchical approach to civilization in general. Like, that's probably one big thing that I just, separate myself out from other, like, radical leftist or radical, types. I think that this is something that ultimately ties me closer to centrism or synthesism, I'd like to call it. But that hierarchy is not carved of stone. It is not steel for the most part. They'd like you to believe that it is. It is clay. It is sand on the, on the beach. It's a sandcastle, and it is very malleable, and it can be stricken down, and we'll just get back to making it. Think about an anthill. You take an anthill and you strike it and destroy it, and those ants just come out and start building it again. And they're going to build it different. They're in some ways they're going to build it the same. Who knows if they're going to build it better, but they will build it again. And that's the kind of the world that we live in. I think the biggest thing about the hierarchy situation is the person at the top needs to remember that they're only at the top because of everybody at the bottom support, holding them up, and they need to show respect. Otherwise, those people at the bottom might just break the entire anthill, break the entire pyramid, whatever image you need in your head. This is, he's getting to some core Jolie's core signature takes here, and I'm glad he's bringing them out of me.
Every world system, even capitalism, contains inside of it a seed of what is coming next. Every hierarchy has, as a part of its inner workings, the thing which will eventually overpower and replace it.
100%.
Whatever is coming next is already here.
Hell, we often make what comes next. Like the system destroys itself from two fronts. It creates something better than itself, and it also alienates itself, destroys itself from the inside. And somebody new comes to the top, and, the sun sets, the sun rises again, and we live in a new world, very much like the old world. I think we're about to get into the next video here. Or not the next video, but the next video game. Disco Elysium. That's the name of the game I was thinking. Disco Inferno. Lovely
Disco
title.
Elysium is a strange game with a sad story. An unlikely hit, it won several Game of the Year awards in 2019 and garnered a cult following for its sharp writing, distinct gameplay, and gorgeous art style.
Yeah, more games like this in the future. Obviously, there's a space for photorealistic graphics. I know there's a lot of people out there who believe strongly in photorealistic graphics, but I personally think that this is pinnacle gaming, where the set decoration here, the character design here, is it the best graphics ever? Well, depends on how you define best. But I think that they're doing a lot of lifting in telling the story.
Its success was marred by controversy, however. Robert Kurvitz, one of the founders of the studio that made the game and a lead writer on the project, was fired several years after its release, along with several other founding members. The situation surrounding his ouster is still not entirely clear, with conflicting reports coming from both the investors who bought a controlling share of the company and Kurvitz himself. The gist of the matter seems to be that the new bosses didn't like Kurvitz and he didn't like them. Kurvitz accused them of looting the studio and steering it in a direction opposite to its founding ethos as a collective. Developers at the studio accused Kurvitz and others of creating a hostile work environment and gender discrimination.
Yeah. It seems like they implemented a tool that they could use, in order to oust the problematic person, this problematic visionary within the studio, and that they can take his intellectual property and then find, things to accuse him of. I'm not saying, I mean, who knows? He could have been a complete shitbag to ladies, but it also feels as though that if certain quotas maybe aren't met, certain ramblings, a mild altercation of or conflict of intellectual ideals turns into an altercation because somebody decided to file a report about it. I don't know. It feels like there's something, basically master's tools, right? The master has the tools. Okay, here's kind of what I'm getting at. There's a lot of things written into kind of the bylaw, the terms of use, things like that, of working in a company, policies. There's many policies out there that they don't want to enforce. Nobody is enforcing them in general until you become the thing that they're scrutinizing, until you are the problem. And now all of a sudden they have all these tools they can use against you. It doesn't matter if, say, Sam has been hitting on coworkers or, browsing the internet on company time. They like Sam. Sam's good for them. He hasn't shown any problems. Sam hasn't tried to unionize the workforce. But Isaac comes around and he's starting to ramble. He's seemingly problematic to the company as a whole. Well, let's start pulling out our policies and scrutinizing what Isaac is doing. How is he speaking to his fellow coworkers? Is there racial issues going on? Is there sexual issues going on? Is he wasting company time? Is he misallocating company property? Is he doing what Sam does? But is he expendable? Do we need to get rid of him? Do we want to get rid of him? Just saying that these tools, these weapons, they sit up on the shelf to be displayed until they're needed, and then they take them off the shelf and start wielding that katana.
Other employees said the blame was shared between all parties involved.
the centrists. Blame is shared. Bad guys on both sides. How about that? Instead of good guys on both sides, bad guys on both sides.
Why am I going into all of this detail about a legal battle at a studio years after their game's breakout success? Because I find it ironic, in an incredibly bitter, gallows humor sort of way, that a studio that produced a game so clear-headed on capitalism's role in the development of world history would then meet its fate being ripped apart by capital.
Oh,
a
yes.
leftist art collective hitting the mainstream and getting acquired by investors, only for those investors to then strip the studio for parts, is an ending I would say is a little too on the nose if it showed up in a novel or a movie. Disco Elysium.
Truth is stranger than fiction, for sure. I mean, that's the problem probably with narrative writing at this point, is you can find all these narratives in real life and they are true. And they didn't, at the very least you could like re-dramatize them, I guess. But to create something completely fictitious out of whole cloth is not necessary anymore in a lot of cases, because it happened in reality.
Shares Cyberpunk 2077's fatalistic tone when it comes to capitalism and the world system it pilots. The game takes place 50 years after a failed worldwide communist revolution that left tens of millions dead. The massacre was so complete for both the hard right and the revolutionary left that the only people left to run the show were the level-headed, middle-of-the-road, centrist liberals. And you can't see this, but I'm putting quotation marks around all of those terms.
Yeah. The center is only the center because the people in charge define it as the center. That's what the Overton window is all about. So just remember, our center is right to somebody else's center. I'm sure maybe Germany, China, things like that. It's all set. It's all dictated by how the society creates its boxes, and all it takes is a new revolutionary or reactionary people to come into power, And then all of a sudden they're changing how they're teaching the students coming up. They're re-educating the adults. They're punishing people who think differently or have ideas that don't fit into their system. And all of a sudden, give it not even a decade, and that center changes radically. And let's face it, I mean, I, for one, am one of those folks that I would probably get, if a show of violence happened, I'd probably be getting in line pretty quickly and just wanting to, worry about my family and friends and just make sure that I'm, not in anybody's crosshairs.
These businessmen and women have spent the better part of a century crushing labor movements and generally siphoning any cash they can out of poor communities and natural resources.
Wait, is he talking about America post-Reagan and pre-Reagan? Post-World War II America. That's what it sounds like to me, folks.
While scolding and disciplining anyone too keen on changing things.
Yep. Think about this. Luigi Mangiani and the assassination. Think about the tone criticism that came into play, how wrong we all are to celebrate this man for what he did. And, there's a lot of debates, like you can get into underlying ethics of it all, but the people at top did not like how we had enshrined this man, turned him into a saint or whatever, a modern saint of America, an American saint. Ooh, that sounds like a good title for something. But they decided that, no, you should not be talking about him like this, and we're going to tell you how you should be considering this, and this is how it is. And you could hear it from Fox, CNN, fucking SNL. Colin Jost, 100%, has a side that he's on, and it's not your side if you're watching this. If you made it this far and you agree with me, A, I think you should be liking and subscribing to the video. B, my channel, I should say. B, your Colin Jost is definitely not on your side. And it's not just because he's bagged Scarlett Johansson. And I'm sorry to say, but Scarlett's probably not on our side either. I love her. She's one of the best modern actresses. Deserves all of her fame and riches and everything like that. I do believe in, meritocracy of some sort, or like, even though it's imagined here in America, there are some people who kind of fulfilled the role. Scarlett Johansson's one of those people. But at the end of the day, she's probably going to be on the other side.
By reminding them how poorly that went the last time somebody tried it.
Mm-hmm.
I generally think the term world building.
That's what they're doing right now with Luigi. They're trying to show us now what will happen to anybody else who tries to do this, and they're trying to treat him as poorly as possible, or bring the book down on him. And granted, he is guilty. I mean, as far as we can tell, he's not innocent. He did what he did. It's just that we enjoyed, or at the very least, what he did. The person had lined up, or the system had lined it up to where violence was going to be enacted upon somebody. My goodness. I should be careful about this. I have no idea how this YouTube, censoring and everything like that goes. I don't know if I just post this video saying the things I said, if I'm going to get flagged or anything. I guess I should say Luigi allegedly killed the CEO, but I think in commonly believed, not just believed, but it's practically been proven, at least in the court of public opinion, that he did in fact kill that man. Yeah, so I don't know. Should I even post this one? I have no clue. Let me know if you think that YouTube is not going to ever push my channel because of what I'm saying.
Doesn't live up to its promise in video games. Most of the time, it means a collection of half-assed lore wiki pages and a generic story about an empire or a king and some war and yada yada yada. None of it really matters.
Bethesda. Yeah. That's what he's essentially saying. This is what Bethesda does.
Many video game worlds do not have history in the real sense of the word. The events 10, 20, 100 years before the start of any given game generally do not have anything to do with the characters that populate the present. If they do have a sense of history, it's only on a surface level. Lots of video games feature revolutions that bear almost no resemblance to real-world revolutionary movements or wars.
100%.
The members of these revolutionary groups are typically sanitized reformers who just want to make the world a better place in a sort of generic, be nicer to everyone way that hints at a democracy without any of the messy work of actually implementing a change on that scale.
He brings up a great point here that, yet again, this is something I'll probably get into more as I explore my voice and exactly figuring out how to say what I need to say. But the people that you're going to end up working with in a revolution are not necessarily going to be good people. There's going to be, and it's not, this isn't like some sort of both sides have bad people on them, which is true. I'm not trying to both sides this, but what I'm trying to say is that you're going to have opportunists that are working with you who just don the politics, necessary in order to gain power. And you're going to deal with what I want to deem as the nega side of your philosophies. Please let me know. I kind of consider it nega beliefs or nega philosophy. I'm trying to pin this down, but the idea that, yet again, it can fall into both sidesism, but every idea, like every ideology specifically, I'm not much of an ideologist. I'm trying to figure this out without the ideology, is constructed in such a way that there are you can take it too far. You can misinterpret. Sometimes you could just interpret it properly and you can take it to its conclusion, and you end up in this like what was a more ideal version of what the world is. This like thing where it's like we could head towards utopia. You take it far enough, and all of a sudden you live in the nega world where things no longer make sense because the ideology conflicts with physics and biology and chemistry, like these core truths of the world. And once they come into conflict, if you're so ideological that you believe in the ideology more than you believe in the truths of the world, then the truths of the world are your enemy. And now you're in nega land where you put the ideology above truth. This happens to, in gender studies, this happens in politics, this happens in economy. And this is the same thing that makes capitalism bad can also make communism, socialism bad. There's these lines that you can cross where you put the ideology above the truth of the world, the truth of how people are, the truth of how, the idea, there's this idea or this great saying that in a bad manager or in like, what is it? If you were to approach product management, with the, if you were to approach rearing and birthing a child, and the way that a lot of project managers handle the way that they handle projects, they would deem that if we got 9 women to birth or to rear the child, we could do it in 1 month because each of those women could do a month's worth of the work. And and then you're now dealing with a methodology that does not make sense to biology. So I hope that this is coming across. This is something I'm probably going to hit on a lot more. This is the idea. These are the ideas that I'm going to script videos around. So that once my channel, I will probably continue doing reactions forever. It's just easy. I just love watching YouTube videos and might as well film myself reacting to them. But I will also do scripted videos. I'm working on my first script now. And these are the ideas that I'm probably going to, that'll follow me through this all. Nega philosophy. When does the philosophy cross into the dark side? And how can the philosophy still work with keeping the truths of the real physical world alive? And so don't be surprised if you hear a lot more about this, and hopefully well-researched and well thought out videos about this. And if that sounds interesting to you, subscribe to the channel.
They don't belong to any particular political movement, and there is never any discussion of class or labor or how things get made, who controls the money, who outfits the armies, etc. Outside of Disco Elysium, the only other games off the top of my head that just outright portray revolutionary communism as a fact of the world would be 4X games like Victoria 3 or Hearts of Iron 4. Shout out to the spreadsheet bros for at least acknowledging it, I guess. In the real world, however, past is prologue. Who you are, your desires and actions, your dreams, your identity, your connections and opportunities are intimately tied to the history of the world around you. History constrains us and directs us. It limits our choices and our horizons. It shapes us. It is a hard ask for a video game to live up to this kind of world building, and most, if we're being honest, don't really need to. But Disco Elysium stands up to the task better than maybe any video game I've ever played. The world of Disco Elysium has history in a real and meaningful sense. The people you talk to, the contacts you make, the crime you're investigating, the events unfolding around you, all of them follow a chain of cause and effect reaching back a century or more. On the surface, it's a mystery story. A man is found lynched behind a motel. You are a cop, tasked with finding out who did it and why. But the game's roots go much deeper than that. As a world, it feels believable and realistic because of the background history that is there if you dig for it. It's refreshing to see a game that treats global trade, economics, politics, labor rights, work, and money as important aspects of its characters' lives. In a lot of video games, even mature games with mature stories, these things aren't really ever talked about in a substantive way. It leaves me feeling a little unable to connect with the characters. Those are important parts of my life. It's what consumes most of my time. It might not necessarily feel like escapism for a game to remind you of those things, but I find it makes the story feel more immediate and gripping. But in order to write about those things, a game needs to have a pretty clear understanding of the way the world functions. And in order to do that, it needs to touch some third rails that are pretty common no-go zones for stories in games. Disco Elysium walks right up to these third rails and lays down on the tracks and lets the big choo-choo train of capitalism run right over it. Forgot.
Choo-choo! Oh, no wonder they were... I wouldn't be surprised if the people who bought them out did so with the intention of shuttering them. Just saying.
I wrote that line. How else would you tell a story like this if you felt the need to talk around subjects like strikes, revolutions, and capital instead of addressing them head on? The characters in this game talk about communism and socialism and capitalism and revolution, war, government, politics, and they typically talk in sharp dialogue with writing that stands head and shoulders above its peers. I found myself regularly choosing outrageous dialogue options just to see how people would respond.
This is something that I believe, as a game maker, I think that people are wanting to go towards like AI interactions with NPCs like this, where you can either speak into a microphone or type out what you want to ask somebody or your response. And I think there are games that could be made like that, but I think we're going to lose the craft of creating interesting dialogue responses, because sometimes these dialogue trees come up and what they're suggesting, and they have way more character. It's like you're truly role playing because the character is speaking in their voice. That's why I don't like choose a dialogue option Fallout 4 style. Choose a dialogue option, then all of a sudden my character's saying something else than what it was said in the dialogue option. I just decided to essentially respond in the affirmative, or respond in the neutral, or respond in the negative, or something like that. I might as well just say those three options. Anyways, but the other thing is if you're typing out the response, you're limited to your own imagination. And I like to think that the reason we read books, the reason we watch movies, is to indulge somebody else's imagination and let that, enter our psyche. And so if I'm like going up to a guy like this and saying, hey, I need you to move, I might only think of like two things to say before I start typing. But here we have somebody who came up with 7 different options, and because they stopped and thought about it probably for hours, we're creating this one dialogue tree. Maybe, who knows, maybe even weeks, days and weeks could have gone into like a good encounter like this, versus like if I were to walk up to them, I would think about it for minutes, not even seconds. and come up with what I think is the best. It's just going to create much shallower gameplay or narrative. I honestly think that it would be to the detriment of video game storytelling for us to rely upon user generated inputs and the AI to respond to what we decide. I mean, that's a big one for me. Like thinking that, how should I say, the individual human is not smarter than the collective, which and the individual human doesn't have nearly as much time as the collective, and that what the collective can forge in that situation is, or what, yeah, basically what you can forge in over a course of time is probably grander than what you can come up with in a moment. You might come up with the right answer in the moment, but you can validate it and examine it over time. And what is a collective of humans but a gathering of time for a single purpose? There's something there. Don't be surprised if I write something more about that.
And the responses often caught me off guard. I was surprised at how much it felt like Disco Elysium was getting things right. And let me explain what I mean by that. I don't just mean that the game talked in a way that I agreed with and confirmed my previously held beliefs. I mean that characters and information get presented in a way that seems logical, material, and pokes and prods at the foundations of people's beliefs in the game. Take the first interview with Titus Hardy and his law enforcement gang, for example. To Kim Kitsuragi, your partner, they're a criminal gang like any of the other ones that roam the streets of Martinez. They have committed an extra-legal killing. One of them needs to be held accountable for it by the law. To them, however, they are the police, and they make a compelling argument for that. No one else was present to bring the man to justice, so they did it themselves. They use violence and intimidation to enforce a sort of order on their community, just like cops do. They are armed, like cops are. They have legal representation and the blessing of community leaders to act the way that they do, like cops do. The only difference is one of scale. You are backed by the coalition government and you get your authority to act from them. The Hardy Boys are backed by their community and they get authority from the union leader.
Yeah, that's ultimately the true power that's held by governments, and what power might be transferred here in the next few years is who has monopoly on violence. It always comes down to that. And what the Hardy Boys are suggesting, I guess, in this situation is that they have a right to violence. And what the system would say is, no, they are subject to the systems and its rules. And that's where are they an exception? Probably not in this situation, because if they are a union, then the leaders of this country, these centrist liberals, would be the ones who say no, would not want them to enact violence because it would go against what their ultimate goals. So, yeah, that's really, really good.
And the more you play Disco Elysium, the more you see that your job isn't necessarily bringing a killer to justice or keeping the streets safe. It's to break a strike and keep a corporation from looking bad.
Yeah.
Or take the character of Everard Clare, the union boss. At first glance, he seems to be a caricature of the corrupt union leader from a right-wing political cartoon. A fat guy who sits in his office all day, pulling strings behind the scenes and hiding behind his wealth and legal protections to let his boys get away with murder, literally. But again, this self-aware streak in the writing shines through.
I'm just going to guess that that's the character that Matt Christman plays.
The character of Everard forces the player to think about what we mean when we say the word corrupt. Some union members openly admit that he is corrupt. A real bastard, but he's our bastard. He cajoles and coerces you into working for him. He lies and intimidates you, withholds information, he extorts people, he lives lavishly. But isn't that what the other side does too? And if the police are in the pocket of the corporations, only interested in breaking the strike, why should the union play by the cops' rules? Why not use the same tactics the firms are using against them? Meet them on their own playing field. Fight fire with fire. Law and order, corruption, obstruction, right to work, all of these terms have different meanings depending which side of the badge you're on. A lesser game probably would have made Everard and all the union members paragons of virtue. Noble workers fighting the good fight against the evil corporations. But in Disco Elysium, they're people. Some of them are true believers, some of them are pragmatic wheelers and dealers, some are just in the middle and want a fair paycheck at the end of the day, and pick sides based on pure self-interest. Most protagonists in most games have higher, nobler callings, or romantic motivations like revenge or self-actualization. But let's be honest here. Why do you think most people get out of bed in the morning? It's to go to...
It's because I have to. I either have to or I feel bored of laying down. You know, in one of the two. Like, hopefully this gets me out of bed moving forward. You know, the idea that if I get up early enough, I can edit a video, I can have a clip out there. But that's ultimately goes back to me wanting to somehow make a living off of this. Yeah.
Work to make money and pay rent and buy groceries. We might tell ourselves that the primary mover of our lives is something more, but ask yourself this. If your job didn't pay you, would you still show up every day, 40 hours a week? No, of course not. And this isn't to say we're all greedy, base, selfish people. It's to say that we don't have another choice. Morals and virtues and higher powers and all that are perfectly fine, but they don't fill an empty stomach. This is what Disco Elysium gets right that so few other games do. The way that capitalism disciplines people, shapes their everyday actions, and can even keep us from doing the right thing if we know it would put our livelihoods at risk.
Part 3, Revolution for Sale.
Can a video game be anti-capitalist? What would that even look like? And, most importantly, would it be fun, or would it just feel like getting a lecture? The thing about anti-capitalism and rebellion against the status quo in general is that it's extremely marketable. You can make so much money criticizing capitalism.
I mean, going against the status quo and capitalism combined equals Hot Topic, which, from my understanding, is probably still one of the few stores doing well at the mall. I mean, we'll definitely see here soon, and it's also, if you ever go into it, you can see how quickly trends change and the way that you rebel against the system changes because of how, like, I would even say, like, 5 years out of high school, like, Hot Topic was no longer a place that I felt comfortable going into. And as a 38-year-old guy, I think that I should be put on a list if I stepped into that place. If I wasn't, like, doing it so with a son or daughter, you know, trying to help them find some, you know, cool shirt to make them the talk of the town so everybody knows that they're also a rebel.
You can sell t-shirts with Karl Marx's face on them. You can start a podcast with a Patreon or a Substack, hawking the hard communist truth to the bourgeois masses. You can absolutely rake in those dollars, coming down hard on the fascist corporate bugmen who make daily life a miserable slog. You can do this because, above everything else, capitalism is adaptable. So adaptable, in fact, that it can easily absorb and neutralize criticism, counteroffensives, and resistance into itself. As a system, it's a shapeshifter. The history of capitalism is a history of a system responding to emergent crises by reconstituting itself into new forms, throwing out old flows and structures, preserving itself with the ferocity of a cornered animal. Because the thing about criticism is, as long as it's not out in the streets, it's not really a concern. Still, I don't think video games should be afraid to say something about capitalism. Video games are art. Art reflects the world in which it's made and always has a point of view. Sometimes even a point of view or a message the authors didn't intend. As a medium, it's perfectly capable of grappling with these ideas in the same way that film and literature or other older art forms do. Not every game needs to be a firebrand, hardline, Marxist-Leninist reckoning with the status quo, and I don't think either of the games in this video are that, to be honest. To me, it doesn't really matter how quote-unquote right or wrong a game gets its interpretation of our world and its history, economics, and politics, but I want to see more games at least take a shot at it. The growth of the medium depends on artists who have something to say. something challenging or provocative or eye-opening. Art does not change the world. It's not as if the only thing standing between us and fully automated luxury space communism is more books and movies and TV shows that say stuff that I agree with.
100%. I think FD Signifier said it recently in a video I watched, not reacting to, big mistake, but essentially he would rather have good media with bad politics than bad media with good politics. I 100% agree with that. This is entertainment at its core. There's bigger truths to humanity than is, communism bad, capitalism bad, communism good. Like if that, there you can, and also you can display those things while still telling a good story. And there's just a lot there. But yeah, we're not going to Netflix series our way out of our situation. And if anything, those Netflix series aren't going to push the ball forward. They're just going to be a release valve for your frustrations. No matter where they end up, the movies, the comics, everything like that, like I'd say they're first and foremost entertainment. There might be some level of aspiration or instruction that comes in through them. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to be the one to, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. It's like it goes beyond, you're going to have to pick up a real book, a real textbook style book, something without a narrative, something without spicy scenes and a first person perspective that, lets you feel like you're the main character and gives you all those feelings that you have in fact defeated capitalism and you will move on to the next level yourself. You're going to have to become part of a bigger collective, and you might not be the hero that everybody remembers. You might just be a cog in the machine of this change that happens. And you know what? If the change is good and you truly believe in it, then you shouldn't worry about just being that cog.
Change comes from people working together with a vision and a plan. But that's not to say that art doesn't play a vital role in people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tool for reflection, for getting people to see the world in a different way. It's an essential part of being a person. And like it or not, capitalism is the water we are swimming in. It's the connective tissue that binds the world together and touches every aspect of our lives. It directs our passions.
It surrounds us. It penetrates us. It gives us life. Let's replace capitalism with the force. Make the force great again.
Limits our options and disciplines us when we step out of line. So, of course, art should have something to say about that. Video games should have something to say about that.
Thank you for watching Blue Sky. Infomercial.bluesky or bsky.social, Twitch at twitch.tv/infomercial_Twitch. Well, wasn't that something? Now, before you move on to the next glorious video in your feed, please leave a comment on this one. I'd highly like to get to know you, my audience, and what you have to say about the things that I watch and what I say to the things that I watch. What do you think about the idea of CRPGs being like having dialogue with trees replaced with AI? That one really, like, even beyond the politics and everything else like that, I really think that that's going to be a death of a genre of game. It could create a new genre. I do agree that there's a new genre of game that is like a conversation simulator, which could be very useful for people because ultimately I believe games are kind of like instructional / something that you do in order to practice life and to understand life from a different perspective. So having a conversation simulator that's like conversation, you're trying to get a raise from your boss. Conversation, you're trying to raise up a woman or guy or whoever. But ultimately, that feels like a different genre than the CRPG because those are storytelling genres, and I think you have to limit and frame the conversations in those games. So anyways, I would love to hear what you have to say about that or anything else that I brought up in this video or that this video by Infomercial brought up. So with that, as always, enjoy yourself.